It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Sarah stumbled upon a quaint antique shop nestled between two towering buildings. Among the relics of the past, an ornate mirror with a silver frame caught her eye. The carvings on the frame were intricate, almost hypnotic, as if they were whispering tales of the ages. The shopkeeper warned her that the mirror had a long history, but Sarah dismissed it as a sales tactic. That evening, she hung the mirror in her living room. It seemed to brighten the space, reflecting the warm glow of her lamp. But as the night deepened, the atmosphere in the house changed. A cold breeze brushed against her neck, though all the windows were closed. At midnight, Sarah heard a faint tapping sound. Following it, she found herself standing before the mirror. The tapping grew louder. To her horror, her reflection didn't mimic her movements. It stared back, its expression slowly morphing into a sinister grin. The next day, Sarah tried to remove the mirror, but it was as if it had fused to the wall. She covered it with a sheet, but the tapping resumed each night, growing louder and more insistent. Shadows danced across her walls, and whispers echoed through the house. One evening, desperate for answers, Sarah returned to the antique shop, only to find it abandoned. The once bustling store was now a dusty, decaying ruin. In a corner, she found a faded photograph of the mirror with the words scrawled in red ink. "The mirror shows not what is, but what hungers." Terrified, Sarah rushed home, only to find the mirror uncovered. Her reflection was gone. In its place stood a shadowy figure with glowing eyes, reaching out from the other side. Sarah's screams echoed into the night, but when the neighbors checked the next morning, the house was silent. The mirror stood in the living room, spotless and gleaming, waiting for its next owner.
It was midnight, and I was washing my face in the bathroom when I noticed something strange. I was looking at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, but there was an uneasy feeling in my chest. I blinked. My reflection blinked too. But then, for a brief moment, it didn't. I panicked. I tried to calm myself, then looked back at the mirror. My eyes met my reflection's eyes, staring right back at me. I took a deep breath and began to watch my reflection closely, turning my head slightly in different directions. And just then, its lips started to move. It was trying to say something, but there was no sound, only the faintest whisper of movement. I couldn't take it anymore and backed away from the sink, quickly moving to my bedroom and leaving the lights on. I didn't sleep all night. When morning came, I went back to the mirror, and everything seemed normal. But since that night, I haven't dared to go into the bathroom alone. And one question keeps haunting me. What if my reflection is still there, living a life of its own?
It was a cold, rainy night when Emma moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town. The real estate agent had warned her about strange rumors about the house, but Emma dismissed them as mere superstition. It was spacious, charming, and most importantly, affordable. She couldn't resist. The first night was uneventful. Emma unpacked and settled into the master bedroom, where a large, ornate mirror hung over the fireplace. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought she heard faint whispers, but she attributed it to the wind shaking the windows. The next morning, Emma explored the house further. In the attic, she found an old diary belonging to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house over a century ago. The diary described strange events: footsteps in the empty hallways, shadows moving on their own, and whispers that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. The final entry was chilling. "They're here. They won't let me go." That night, the whispers returned, louder this time. Emma tried to ignore them, but they became more insistent, as if they were calling her name. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and noticed something strange in the mirror. The reflection in the room was slightly distorted. The furniture was in different positions, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The room went silent, and Emma felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She turned, but no one was there. When she looked in the mirror again, her reflection was gone. In its place was a pale, thin figure with empty eyes, reaching out towards her. Emma screamed and stumbled back, but the figure in the mirror did not move. It just smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that sent shivers down her spine. The whispering started again, this time coming from all around her. Too late, she realized that the house had chosen her just as it had chosen Margaret. The house was silent the next morning. The diary in the attic now contained a new entry in Emma's handwriting. "They're here. They won't let me go." And a faint...
Deep in the countryside of Yorkshire stood an ancient manor, once grand, now decaying with time. Amelia had inherited the house from her late grandmother, a woman she barely knew. She decided to visit the estate for the first time, planning to stay a weekend, clean up, and prepare it for sale. The first day passed uneventfully, though the silence of the old house unnerved her. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the cracked windows seemed louder in the stillness, but it wasn't until the second evening that she stumbled upon the attic door. Hidden behind an old tapestry, the door was small and warped, as if it hadn't been opened in decades. Curiosity got the better of Amelia, and she pulled it open with a groan of rusted hinges. Dust swirled in the dim light as she climbed the narrow, rickety stairs. The attic was cluttered with the remnants of a forgotten past, old trunks, broken. But in the far corner, standing tall against the wall, was an antique mirror, its glass clouded with age. Its ornate, gilded frame was covered in intricate carvings of twisted vines and strange, unrecognizable creatures. Amelia walked toward it, drawn by an inexplicable urge. As she wiped the dust from the surface, the reflection slowly became clearer. But something was wrong. In the mirror, her reflection smiled. But Amelia hadn't. Startled, she took a step back, heart pounding in her chest. She looked over her shoulder to see if there was something behind her. There was nothing. When she turned back to the mirror, her reflection had returned to normal, her own anxious face staring back. Shaking it off as a trick of the light, she left the attic, trying to ignore the eerie feeling that gnawed at her. That night, she dreamt of the mirror. In her dream, the reflection smiled again, but this time it moved toward her, stepping out of the glass. The reflection whispered her name, its voice twisted and cold. She woke in a sweat, the whisper still echoing in her ears. The following day, strange things began happening. Objects moved from where she had placed them, faint whispers echoed in empty rooms, and she felt as though she was being watched. It was as if the house itself was alive, and it did not want her there. Determined to face whatever was going on, Amelia decided to return to the attic. The mirror stood exactly as she had left it, but this time the reflection in the glass wasn't her own. A figure stood behind her, a woman with hollow eyes, pale skin, and lips twisted into a grotesque smile. Amelia spun around, but there was no one there. The air grew cold, and the room darkened, as if the light was being drained from it. A voice echoed through the attic, soft at first, then louder, filled with malice. "You can't leave. You're mine now." Her reflection began to change, shifting into something else, its features contorted, its eyes black, its smile growing wider and more sinister. The reflection moved again, reaching out from the glass, its hand pressing against the inside of the mirror as if trying to break through. Amelia stumbled backward, heart racing. She could feel an unseen force pulling her toward the mirror, the air around her growing thick and oppressive. Desperate, she turned and ran for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. She was trapped. Behind her, the figure in the mirror laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down her spine. Amelia screamed, banging on the door, pleading for it to open, but the force was too strong. She could feel her body being dragged back toward the mirror, her limbs growing heavy as if something was pulling her down. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was her reflection, standing at the edge of the mirror, smiling that same sinister smile. When Amelia's friends came looking for her a week later, they found the house empty. Everything was untouched, except for the attic. The mirror stood there, polished and gleaming, and inside it, if you looked closely enough, you could see a figure, A woman with wide, terrified eyes, banging on the glass from the inside, her silent screams forever trapped in the reflection. They never found Amelia, but the mirror was still there, waiting for the next curious soul to come too close.
The town of Ravenswood was a small, quiet place, nestled deep within the dense, ancient woods of northern England. The locals avoided the forest after dark, for it was said to be haunted. Strange lights were often seen flickering between the trees, and whispers echoed through the night, carried by the wind. The most unsettling stories, however, were about those who ventured too far into the woods and never returned. Evelyn Hart, a young woman with a curious mind and a thirst for the unknown, had recently moved to Ravenswood. The stories of the haunted woods intrigued her, and despite the warnings from the townsfolk, she was determined to uncover the truth. One chilly October evening, Evelyn decided to venture into the forest. She equipped herself with a flashlight, a notebook, and a small digital recorder, hoping to capture any evidence of the paranormal. As she entered the woods, the sun dipped below the horizon, and an eerie silence fell over the trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Evelyn walked deeper into the forest, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every now and then, she paused to listen, but all she could hear was the sound of her own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. After what felt like hours, she reached a clearing surrounded by tall, gnarled trees. In the center of the clearing stood an old stone well, covered in moss and ivy. Curiosity piqued, Evelyn approached the well. She shone her flashlight into its depths, but the light couldn't penetrate the darkness below. As she leaned closer, she thought she heard something, a faint whisper, barely audible. "Help! Me!" The voice was weak, almost desperate. Evelyn's heart raced. She grabbed her recorder and pressed the record button, holding it over the well. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Please, help me." Evelyn hesitated, her rational mind battling with her curiosity. She knew she should leave, but something about the voice compelled her to stay. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small rope she had brought with her. Tying one end to a nearby tree, she lowered the other into the well. As the rope descended, the whispers grew more frantic, overlapping with one another until they became an incomprehensible cacophony of voices. Evelyn's hands trembled, but she continued to lower the rope until it finally hit the bottom with a soft thud. "Come down," a voice urged, clear and distinct amid the chaos. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She knew it was a terrible idea, but the pull of the unknown was too strong to resist. She tied the recorder to her belt, took a deep breath, and began to climb down the rope. The walls of the well were damp and cold, the air thick with the smell of wet stone. The voices grew louder with each foot she descended, their whispers echoing in her ears. As she neared the bottom, she felt the rope give way slightly, causing her to lose her grip and fall the last few feet onto a soft, muddy surface. Evelyn quickly scrambled to her feet, shining her flashlight around. The well was much larger at the bottom than she had anticipated, more of a cavern than a simple well. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone and glowing faintly in the darkness. Before she could examine them further, the voices stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Evelyn's flashlight flickered, and the temperature dropped suddenly, her breath visible in the cold air. Then she heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from the shadows. She turned her flashlight toward the noise, her hand shaking. The beam illuminated a figure slowly emerging from the darkness. A woman, her clothes tattered and her hair matted with dirt and leaves. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets staring straight at Evelyn. Evelyn stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman reached out a skeletal hand, her fingers curling as if to grasp something. "Help! Me!" the woman whispered, her voice the same one Evelyn had heard earlier. Evelyn couldn't move, frozen by fear. The woman took another step forward, her movements unnatural, jerky, as if her limbs were being controlled by unseen strings. The air around them grew heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls of the well were closing in on them. Suddenly, the woman lunged at Evelyn, her mouth opening wide in a silent scream. Evelyn screamed too, the sound echoing through the cavern as she turned and scrambled up the rope. She climbed as fast as she could, her hands burning from the friction. The voices returned, louder and more frenzied, urging her to come back, to stay with them. But Evelyn didn't stop. She pulled herself over the edge of the well and collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The voices continued to echo from the well, growing fainter as she crawled away. Finally, the whispers faded into silence. Evelyn staggered to her feet, her mind racing. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the forest, the town's lights a welcome sight in the distance. Back in her small, cozy home, Evelyn played the recording from her adventure. At first, it was just static, but then she heard the whispers, clear and unmistakable, the same desperate pleas for help she had heard in the well. But then, something else. Her own voice, distorted and distant, repeating the words she never said. "Come down. Stay with us." The recording ended with a soft, chilling laugh, one that sent a shiver down her spine. She deleted the file, but the sound lingered in her mind, haunting her dreams for many nights to come. Evelyn never went back to the woods, but sometimes, on quiet nights, she swore she could hear the whispers, faint and distant, calling her back to the darkness.
The dilapidated mansion stood like a rotting carcass, its shattered windows staring down at the group of friends like empty, soulless eyes. Despite the biting cold of the night, sweat clung to their brows as they carried their possessed friend Mia into the house. Mia's voice had turned guttural, her words a mix of languages none of them understood. Her eyes, once a warm brown, were now a menacing, glowing yellow. It had all started during their visit to the old cemetery earlier that day, a dare gone horribly wrong. "Hold her tight, Liam," Sarah hissed, clutching the old leather-bound book they had found in the library. Its pages were filled with rituals and symbols, their meanings lost to time. "I'm trying," Liam grunted, struggling as Mia's strength seemed almost inhuman. Her fingers clawed at him, her screams echoing through the hollow halls of the house. Jake lit the candles in a trembling rush, forming a circle around Mia. "This better work, Sarah," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I'm not ready to die tonight." Sarah knelt, her shaking hands tracing the sigils drawn hastily on the floor. "We have no choice. Whatever's inside her, it wants more than her soul. It wants us." As Sarah began chanting, the air thickened, the flickering flames dimming. Mia's screams turned to laughter, cold, cruel, and otherworldly. "You think you can save her?" the voice mocked, no longer Mia's. "She belongs to me now." "Shut up," Liam shouted, holding Mia's thrashing body with all his might. The room grew colder. Shadows twisted unnaturally on the walls, taking on monstrous forms. The book in Sarah's hands began to glow faintly as her chants grew louder. The entity inside Mia let out a piercing shriek, its hold on her faltering. "Jake, now!" Sarah yelled. Jake splashed holy water onto Mia, and the effect was immediate. She convulsed violently, the glow in her eyes flickering like a dying flame. "You are not welcome here," Sarah screamed, finishing the incantation. With a deafening roar, the shadows coalesced into a towering figure, only to implode in a flash of blinding light. Mia collapsed into Liam's arms, her body limp but breathing. The oppressive weight in the room lifted, leaving behind an eerie silence. "Mia," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside her friend. Mia's eyes fluttered open, their familiar warmth returning. "What happened?" she murmured weakly. Jake let out a shaky laugh. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you." The four friends huddled together, battered but alive, vowing never to test the boundaries of the supernatural again. "Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or specific details added. Hey, hey."
It was a cold, moonless night in the small town of Black Hollow. It was the kind of night when the air felt heavy and the silence was almost murmurous. The townspeople knew better than to venture into the woods after dark, especially on such nights. But Sarah, a curious and persistent journalist, did not believe in the local superstitions. She was determined to uncover the truth behind the legend of the Whispering Woods. The story went like this. Decades ago, a group of hikers disappeared into the woods without a trace. The only clue left behind was a bloody journal. The last entry read, "They are calling to me. I can hear them whispering. I cannot resist." Since then, no one has been seen again after sundown. Some said the woods were cursed. Others believed the trees themselves were alive, hungry for human souls. Sarah laughed wryly at the stories. She was a woman of logic, not folklore. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a tape recorder, she stepped into the forest just as the last light of day was fading. The trees were tall and twisting, their branches scratching at the sky. The deeper she went, the colder the air, as if the forest were sucking the warmth from her body. At first, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of leaves. Then she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. So soft that she thought it might be the wind. But as she went further, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were in no language she recognized. The voices were guttural, foreign, and seemed to come from all over her. The flashlight flickered. She hid it, and the light held, but the shadows around her seemed to move unnaturally. The whispers turned into voices, calling her name. Sarah. Sarah. They were soft, almost comforting, but something was wrong with them. Something inhuman. Panic began. She turned to leave, but the path she had taken was gone. The trees seemed to block her, their knotted roots forming a maze. The voices grew louder, more insistent. "Stay with us. Join us." Her heart pounded as she ran, but no matter which direction she chose, she was going deeper into the forest. Then she saw them. Shadows moved among the trees, uncreated by any light, existing on their own. They were long, impossibly long, with long limbs and empty eyes. They were not walking, they were gliding, their forms flickering like static. Sarah froze, her breath visible in the freezing air. The shadows surrounded her, their whispers now a deafening chorus. She dropped her camera and recorder, clutching her ears to block out the noise. But it wasn't just in her ears. It was in her mind, clawing at her thoughts, her sanity. She fell to her knees, screaming, but no sound came. The shadows closed, their cold, skeletal hands reaching for her. The next morning, a search party found Sarah's equipment scattered near the edge of the forest. The camera's memory card had failed, but the voice recorder was still working. When they listened back, all they heard was static and faint, inhuman whispers. Sarah was never seen again. The Whispering Woods remain intact to this day. Locals say that if you stand at the edge of the forest on a quiet night, you can still hear the voices that draw you in. And if you listen very carefully, you can answer.
In 1974, a quiet neighborhood in Amityville, New York became the site of one of the most horrifying and mysterious events in American history. Inside a seemingly normal house, a family was brutally murdered in their sleep. The only survivor, Ronald DeFeo Jr., confessed to killing his parents and siblings, claiming he was driven by voices he couldn't silence. But the terror didn't end there. Just a year later, the Lutz family moved into the house, hoping to start fresh. What they found instead were horrors beyond their darkest nightmares. Cold spots, strange odors, and terrifying apparitions plagued their every moment. The walls seemed to bleed, and a mysterious voice echoed through the halls, commanding them to get out. Within 28 days, the Lutz family fled, leaving everything behind, unable to endure the evil presence that still lingers in the house today. Some say the spirits of the murdered DeFeo family still roam the halls, while others believe something far more sinister resides there, waiting for its next victim. This is the Amityville Horror, a real-life nightmare that has terrified generations and continues to haunt those who dare to remember.
Then, when I was in my early 20s, I stayed the night at two friends' house, and they brought out a Ouija board, and it said I should leave immediately, and he hated me. I didn't believe it was part of his nature, but I also hid how mean my friends were to me. He just kept sending me really horrible messages for about 30 minutes. The last message said, if I had followed his advice and left sooner, I would have died in a car accident. It was all my nerves listening. I slept in bed with his friends all night. When I got home the next day, my mother told me about some really weird behavior from my cat from midnight to 1 a.m. My Siamese cat was constantly running up and down the upstairs hallway and throwing himself in front of the closed bedroom door with all his might, and he was meowing really loudly and desperately. My family were really worried he was going to hurt himself. He was so wild that they were really trying to get to me to stop him from hurting me. He had never done anything like this before. Friends can subscribe to my channel. Open the notification bell and be aware of my videos. Thank you.